physician, what are your symptoms? So we're always listening. I know this is kind of a funny way to express this discernment. We're always listening for a doorway. So you ask the questions about your upbringing, your background. You ask questions about, what are your personal habits? Do you have addictions? Drugs? I don't care if you smoked marijuana once, I want to know about it. Meth. Meth is a big doorway. Now, very oftentimes, meth users, as a side effect, will have chronic hallucinations. And I've had people who are meth users, former meth users, and they've been sober, but they've had chronic hallucinations because of the damage that meth does to the brain. I need to know that, because the first meth person who came to me, I had to go find a toxicologist and say, what can you tell me about meth that I should know? I'm the exorcist of my diocese, whether you believe in any of that or not. What do I need to know about the attributes of meth that I should be aware of? That it takes at least 3 years for a person to have complete sobriety as to whether or not the brain will heal, and there's no guarantee. That was very important information. Cocaine is a doorway. Hallucinogenic drugs are a doorway. Porn is a doorway. It's a big one. And I hear lots of confessions now where people come confessing that stronghold, and it is. Because not only of the effect it has on our brain, but it also serves as a doorway to the demonic, because the demonic can also travel along electrical currents. That does not mean that one's computer is possessed, but what it does mean is that those images can have a huge detrimental effect because of the effect on the brain. Violent video games. There's a Japanese violent video. So what do? They build a golden calf. That's a form of divination. This is becoming much more mainstream now in the US. And as it becomes more mainstreamed, it becomes kind of more part of the culture to go to a party. As I had a member of my parish come to me not too long ago and say, my daughter went to a birthday party and they played with a Ouija board. And I said, don't let your daughter go back to that house again. And I said, I will pray over your daughter, just as a precaution. And it wasn't to scare her, and nothing happened. But when these things become part of the culture, they look harmless. There has been a growing movement, just as there was in Europe, and it continues. John Paul II mandated this because in Europe, the occult was raging and is raging out of control. And as more people are drawn away from institutional religion or belief in a God in a personal way, or they're looking for alternatives because classical religion doesn't provide either the answers or the satisfaction or the fruitfulness or something else that's missing in their life, we are all spiritual beings. How can I say that? Because we all have a soul, regardless of whether we believe in God or not. We're all spiritual beings. And we have been given the ability to reason and the possibility of a formed conscience and the ability to have free will. And so because of that, that's what separates us from the lower elements of creation. And so therefore, when prayer doesn't work, because I'm used to getting answers to questions and dilemmas because of the push of a button, which is as our society becomes more technologically advanced, we've also become more isolated, because I can do everything and have everything I need without other relationships, including one with God. But people still are searching because there are questions in our life that will never become fully addressed while we live. And that is where science ends and spirituality and faith begins. And so as people search, the occult and the New Age are all about power and knowledge. Unfortunately, if people's faith optic is thin, then they are not able necessarily to discern out what is a practice that is healthy and helpful, and what are practices that I should stay away from. And very often, when people seek me out, they are on, or another exorcist, they're on the precipice of recognizing that they have waded too far in to a reality in which they realize they're over their head. And so that's when they seek the assistance of an exorcist out. Or they've tried other approaches to see why are they having this severe depression? Why are they having psychosis types events of hearing things and seeing things? Why are they somehow under a kind of a state of oppression over a long period of time? Why are they having demonic dreams or violent dreams that psychiatrists and psychologists and medication attached doesn't seem to fix? And so very often I'm called because we've tried a lot of other approaches and I'm still suffering, or my loved one is still suffering. Now, the question oftentimes I get asked is, well, how do you tell? Well, the discernment is the first step. And we listen very carefully for doorways, and then we usually will employ what we would say are called deliverance prayers, prayers addressed to God, in which we ask the Lord, A, if there is something, cast it out, and B, if there is something, please show it to us. I always believed in the power of prayer, but when you are in prayer, praying for illumination, you see how the power of prayer and the sacraments and the sacramentals have a tremendous power. Not magic and not sorcery-like, but real power. For if there is a preternatural, in other words, a demon, or some other agent sent by Satan, the reaction to the prayer or to the sacramentals, the crucifix, holy water, and the sacraments, such as the Eucharist, will be palpable, viewable, and tremendous. And so that's the discernment. And so there's 6 classic signs that we look for as we're listening for the doorways. 1, an aversion to the sacred. So if someone comes to church, a Catholic church or any church, someone goes into a sacred place in which it is a house of prayer, one of the aversions might be one begins to get sick to their stomach, one feels nauseous. Receiving the body of Christ in the Catholic tradition can be a harrowing experience because either the demon will give off an odor against the sacred species, the host, which will be so pungent that the person cannot receive. Or if they do receive, consuming the Eucharist will burn as they're swallowing it. Or if they bless themselves with holy water. Or even if during the consecration of the Mass, they will begin to have a reaction. That's one possibility. Secondly would be during a deliverance session, we never start out with a formal exorcism. That's the last thing an exorcist ever does, always. I'll tell you why in a little bit. Another would be during a prayer session, the person begins to possess a kind of physical strength that they don't normally possess. I'll give you I'll give you 2 examples. One was in Italy, one was at home. I was with Father Carmen, and I knew nothing. I believed in the existence of Satan, and I began to go to his sessions Mondays, Tuesdays, and Thursday afternoons from 3:30 to 6:30. I did that for 3.5 months, and we saw lots of people. And this one day, he spoke very little. I knew more Italian than he knew English, so he says to me, "Padre Gary, come on Saturday." Very interesting case. So I show up, and these 2 priests, these 2 Franciscans, one of whom I knew, bring in this woman who was about 4 feet 9 inches tall, and they're having a hard time bringing her in. And they sit her in the chair, and she is just growling, and she is sticking her tongue out and spitting at the priest, and she is screaming and yelling. And when he started the prayer, when he started the formal rite, It ended up having 5 of us holding this woman down. Otherwise, the demon through the woman would have probably tried to kill the priest. And this is a 4'9" woman, 4'9" woman. At home, I worked with a man who, when he was in his mother's womb, his father did not believe that the child in his wife's womb was his. The family was from El Salvador, and so he began, out of a sense of jealousy and mistrust, performing acts of witchcraft against his wife while she was carrying the baby. Bad. The wife, in turn, in retaliation, started performing acts of witchcraft against her husband. They're divorced now. When Victor was 2, he was molested by a half-brother. For years, he believed that he had a guardian angel around him because he felt there was something attached. 8 years ago, he's 43 now, 8 years ago, in a cathedral, I won't mention the diocese because I want to protect his anonymity, he manifested at the Easter Vigil for the very first time in front of the bishop. And so they ended up calling me because they had no exorcist in that diocese, and they went to a priest who's also in my priest support group in that diocese, and we worked with him for 4 years. And these were the most ferocious demons I have ever seen in my life. As far as just getting him in the church, sometimes it would take a half an hour because the demons within him were trying to restrain him from coming in. And so when during the rite of exorcism, we would have 4 or 5, 6 people around him and restraining him appropriately if necessary. We finally got to the point of calling on Michael and the archangels to restrain him, and they do. Because you have to be careful. You don't want to do some harm or damage to the person over whom you're praying. So that's another example. Another example would be speaking in a language you have no competency in. So during prayer, the person just begins speaking in Spanish or Russian or Latin or gibberish or some kind of language that has cadences to it, but you don't know what it is. But it's not just babble. Another sign would be during prayers, the person begins to tell things about you or somebody else with you. That's why we always make sure we go to confession before a deliverance or an exorcism, or we've been recently. Another would be what's called foaming at the mouth, where during prayer, the person begins to cough in a way in which they're trying to expel something, as opposed to, I just don't feel very good. But it goes on for a long period of time. And usually what the person is convulsing, they're convulsing the demon. And it comes out in the form of sputum. And that's what foaming at the mouth is. That's actually a good thing. Because demons are pure spirits. They don't have bodies, like corporeal bodies like we do. They're more powerful than we are, they travel faster than we are, and their sense of free will is far clearer and keener than ours is. The last sign is a distortion that would look something like a person who has epileptic seizures, where the face is distorted, the limbs, the arms and the legs are flying around. Sometimes the person will put themselves into a position, some kind of a body language position that looks similar to what a snake would look like on Animal Planet rolled up. And I've seen that often. And then it's hissing and it's blaspheming and it's calling you names and cursing and all of that stuff. So those are the classic signs. You don't have to have all 6 signs for us to be convinced that the person needs deliverance prayer and maybe eventually needs an exorcism. But you always want to move up the chain of command. So for a Catholic, you get the person back into a rhythm, unless they're in a rhythm, you get them into a rhythm of prayer daily,